So we're talking about Philemon. Maybe it would be useful just to provide some context. You've been researching Philemon for a while. Maybe just to talk a little bit about your research and what you're writing and what you're finding or working on.
Yes, so I've been working on a Philemon commentary for the International Theological Commentary series edited by Scott Swain, Michael Allen over at RTS Orlando, and it's going to be published with T&T Clark. And this letter is 335 words long, but they've given me 100,000 words to write. And so really the ways that I kind of try to tackle this little letter, which has so much to say about it, uh, is intro and commentary. So in my introduction, I'm dealing with ways people have read Philemon and then reading Philemon canonically, reading Philemon historically, reading Philemon socially, socio-theologically, and biblically theologically, and trying to tackle gift giving because you have a lot of language like obligation, you owe me. He says, I want you to do what is required, but I want you to do it by and through love. So there's a lot of exchange language. Uh, Onesimus himself is property of Philemon. So he's a possession, but he wants him to give him away not by compulsion in verse 14, but willingly. So gift giving is a big part of that. But then also you've got to tackle slavery. So I deal with slavery in the ancient Roman world and try to understand Paul's perspective in the ancient world, not from our perspective, post antebellum slavery, back onto Paul, but truly try to understand that. And I put him in conversation with Seneca and others, and then work my way into the commentary, where I just try to give a what I call a socio-theological reading, which is one that does justice to the background, but one that is also robustly theological, pastoral, even confessional, which the series kind of allows for me to do all of that.
Now, people might notice that when they look for a commentary on Philemon, it's often connected to Colossians. Can you talk
Right.
about why is that? Why do people write commentaries on Colossians and Philemon? What's the relationship there, or the historical context of those two letters?
Right. Yeah. So a lot of people would say that Philemon was a Colossian, or lived in Phrygia. And the reason is that all the names that are listed, even at the end of Philemon, are mentioned in Colossians as well. And so you've got that historical connection between the two letters. What I'm trying to argue is, yes, historically, those two letters are connected, but I also think we need to read Philemon along with Philippians and Ephesians and doing more canonical work beyond Colossians because of the connection between the word koinonia and how that's used in Philippians, for example. And then in Ephesians, you've got slavery language. The master and slave and the household codes are mentioned in some remarkable ways that I think really does amplify and help enhance our reading of Philemon. So I think, yes, Colossians and Philemon go together, but I do think all the prison epistles are really helpful to read together, especially even First Timothy, some of the pastorals on
Yeah.
slavery.
So if somebody was with you on an elevator, if I can put it that way, and they wanted you had 10 floors to tell them here's why you really ought to read Philemon and here's what it's about. Have you given us your answer already, or how would you summarize that?
Yeah, I think I would try to summarize it by saying that there is an implicit theology of grace in Philemon that sometimes just is never drawn out. So, for example, in this commentary, I'm using 2 Corinthians 8 and 9 as a hermeneutical lens for Paul's theology of grace because those two chapters pretty much sum it up. And I'm taking that lens and then reading the book of Philemon. Having done this, it's really fascinating to ask the question, has anyone done this in the past? And I just came across John Chrysostom's commentary on Philemon, and the kind of things that he's drawing out are the kind of things that I've been seeing, and it's remarkable. And so I think a rich theology of grace, which makes sense of that letter, can be extracted. And it makes sense because you've got grace in the beginning of the letter and then grace at the end. This is often how Paul begins and ends his letters. And in the ancient world, a lot of people would begin a letter with kairein, right? Greetings. So you kind of have the grace language there.
Because
But
grace in Greek is charis.
yes, grace in Greek
Charain.
is charis. Yeah, right. So they would begin letters by using a term related to grace, but Paul ends his letters that way. And it's fascinating because it seems to be a Christian invention. And you wonder why he does that. Well, because he sees people as being caught up in the momentum of grace, even within the reading of this letter in corporate worship. And so thinking about a theology of grace in Philemon is something that you normally wouldn't do if you just approach the letter and started reading. But I think if you recognize that implicit theological structure in the mind of Paul, when you read that letter, you begin to make sense of it. And I think it has a lot of pastoral payoff for reconciliation and thinking about what true, genuine Christian reconciliation looks like, communion of the saints, how we do the one anothering, not just othering, right? It's not just one way, but a reciprocal relationship of giving and receiving grace from God, and the implications of having God involved in your relationships, I think, is great, not just for the church, general relationships, but even for marriage. But you get a glimpse into the mind of Paul as to how grace can transform the most asymmetrical relationship there is in the ancient world, a master and a slave. And he does that by pointing both of them to a master above. And so what we get a glimpse of in Philemon is how God transforms and even subverts social status in the ancient world, power, honor, and all the dynamics that go along with that with the gospel. I think that's one of the most fascinating things about the letter.